Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing something slightly different. I'm going to be showing you a bead embroidery project and what you're going to want to have to do that. Now of course let's talk about what you bead onto. Of course you can bead onto the stabilizer that is meant for bead embroidery, but I like to just use the sewing stabilizer. So this is, I'll bring over a little sample of it. This is kind of what it looks like. It's quite stiff, and this is the Pelon Peltex 7D, and this is just the ultra firm stabilizer, and you find this in the sewing department, but this works great. So that's what I'm going to be going off of, but you can of course use whatever you have at home that you think is similar to that thickness. It is quite thick, but your needle can still get through it really easily. So then, talking about needles, you're going to want to have embroidery needles. So the difference between embroidery needles and a regular beading needle is embroidery needles are short. They're only about this tall, instead of some beading needles can be, you know, quite large. So this is 10 pieces. You can get this from Hobby Lobby. That's where I got mine. It's $2.99 for 10 needles, which is really great, especially since you can get a 40% off coupon on that. And this is the Bead-A-Lon, and I think this says Wildfire here. I'm not quite sure because of the sticker, but it's hard beading needles, and these are great for bead embroidery. And up here it has the number 13. Okay, and then you also want thread. I've gone through what kind of threads I like to use, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time, but this is the Coats & Clark transparent sewing thread. You can find this in the sewing department at your Joann's craft store. If you want to use see-through thread, which you can, I'm not going to today because it's not necessary, but if you're using transparent beads that you don't want to see thread through, you could go with this option. And then obviously there's the Bead-A-Lon Nymo Thread D that I've used in past videos, and this is just beading thread, and that's what I'll be using. Now I think that it is possible to do any bead embroidery project with sewing thread. I've never tried it, but I have a feeling that you could if you didn't have any of these other two options that I'm showing you. You may want to use some, this is Thread Heaven, but basically it's a wax for your thread. It helps it so it doesn't tingle as much. And if I can get this lid off, it looks like this, and it's not really that sticky to your finger, but it does have that tacky feel, and you can just run your thread over this, and that will help it so it doesn't tangle up as much. So you may want that. And then of course you'll want scissors. It's nice to have a different scissors that you use for cutting your thread than cutting your stabilizer, because stabilizer could dull your scissors. So don't use your favorite pair of scissors for cutting the stabilizer. Now, I am going to show you some different beads today. Now obviously, let me move this out of the way. Obviously, bead embroidery is all up to you. That's the thing about bead embroidery, is there's so many options, and I feel like that's partially what can intimidate people, is because there's so many different options. It's really all up to you. But that's where different colors you can use for this project, different focal stone. So you can buy cabochons, and those you'll have to glue down. I like to use E6000 if I'm gluing down a cabochon. You can glue it right down onto the stabilizer, hold it if you are putting it on here, put it on there with the E6000 applied to the back of your gem. You don't want to use too much so it doesn't bulge out on either side of your gem, but then you're going to want to squeeze the gem in the stabilizer just for a few minutes to make sure that it's really secured down. Now if you're using a Rivoli or something that has a pointed back, you're going to want to fold your stabilizer, and I'll show you how to do that later. But today, in case you don't have E6000 or you don't have a cabochon, but you have a bead and you really like that bead, you can simply stitch it down onto your stabilizer. So that's what I'm going to do. Let me see if I can reach my bead right now. Okay, so this is the bead I'm going to be using today, and you can see it just has some pretty veins of color through it, and I thought that's really fun. And it's just a bead. It just has that, and I'm guessing that this is around a size 6mm. And I'm just going to stitch that down to my stabilizer with some thread. Then you can go and start beading right away, and you don't have to wait for glue also. So that's really great. Now, let me show you the beads. So I just looked through my whole beading stash and I found some other beads that I think I'm going to use. So I'll bring over my bead tray. So this is my bead tray, and this is kind of what I'm picturing to use. Let's see if I can get it all in. I'm thinking about using some Rocaille beads. These are just some beads that I got from the Beads and Buttons show, so I really couldn't tell you the name of these, or these, those both I couldn't tell you. But then this is just a strand of Hildy and Joe, really gorgeous saturated orange color, and that I just got from my Joann's craft store. And then more Rocaille beads. So I'll name these for you. This is the opaque light olive, and this is the 11-0. Let's see if I can get it in focus. 11-0 seed beads, opaque light olive, and this is an 18-gram tube. And this is check glass beads. These are from Hobby Lobby. It's $2.99, and this section of bead often goes 50% off, so very affordable for these. And then I'll show you this color also, which matches my stone really great. So I'll bring over my stone. This is the one I'm going to use, and then this really picks up those dark colors in the stone really well. So this is the Toho Bead Round. This is actually 15-0 light jonquil lined aqua, and I absolutely love this. It's kind of fun. It has a lighter painted inside and then a darker see-through glass part, and it's really nice, and that will pull in my gem. And then I have some golds. You can get these gold Rocaille tubes from Hobby Lobby also. I have that in 8-0 and 11-0, and this is the metallic gold, and this is the 18-gram tube. Again, check glass beads, and they're $2.99. So I kind of have these in order of what I think I'll use them, but of course you can just have your palette of colors and just pick up beads as you go. You don't need to plan it out ahead of time. Just kind of pick the beads that you think look good together. So then that green color, and then this is the yellow. This is the opaque yellow 11-0s from those Rocaille beads, and then this is the opaque light orange. I love that color, and this is the 11-0s. The Rocaille check glass beads also. And then we have our main focal bead, which this is getting out of the camera, our main focal bead. Okay, so if you wanted to start with a Rivoli in the center, this is a Rivoli. It has a pointed back. That's the difference, is it goes to a point. And what you would want to do so that it snugs right up into your interfacing is you'd want to do it a little different. You would fold your interfacing and make that a crease. Then you can mark with your pencil along that line of your fold just to make it easier for you to see, and then fold it the other way. And that way you'll have a cross sort of look on the back, a plus sign. At that point, I'll flip it to this one. You can kind of see it, the cross plus sign look. And then when it's folded on that, you would take your scissors and snip just a tiny bit, and then snip just a tiny bit into that, so that when it's flattened out, you'll see that plus sign of snipped open stabilizer. At this point, you can apply your glue to your Rivoli, and you can push your Rivoli in, and it pops up just a teensy bit, and it really just gives it the perfect little hug of a pocket. And when you apply the glue to the Rivoli, be careful not to have too much squidging out the sides, but then just squeeze it and hold it there for a few minutes, and you'll end up with the perfect setting for a Rivoli. Okay, so as you can see, this is a different setup. My sister's over here. Hi. So I have my stabilizer cut to the square that I'm going to use, and then I have my focal bead. I took the beading thread that I'm going to be using today, and I cut off, I don't know, 2 feet of it. And that's what's great about this, is that you don't really need to start with a ridiculously long piece of thread. You can do whatever you're comfortable with because it's so easy to add on. So my sister's going to be doing something else other than bead embroidery today, but we both are using similar colors. So right now I'm just going to be putting a relatively large knot at the end of my thread. I like to stack knots, but of course you can just do one large knot. But I have the knot at the end of my thread so that it doesn't come through my stabilizer. And I'm going to come up relatively in the center of my stabilizer piece because I'm just going to be stitching down my bead at this point. So I'm just going to come out of my stabilizer. And what's great is that little knot just catches it so you can tug on your thread as much as you want. So now I'm going to put on my bead and not get it caught on the end of my tray, hopefully. And now I'll just hold that down and then I'll stitch down on the other side of it to secure our bead in the center. And depending on how large your hole in the center of your bead is, you may want to go through it several times to keep it secure. But at that point I have it stitched through the hole on the side of the bead with the thread once, but I may do that several times. So let me pause the camera and do that. Okay, so at this point I have gone through the center of the bead several times so that it's more secure and it's not going to move so easily. So now I would just come up relatively close to the bead. You don't want to come out too far away because you want this to be snug up against it, and you're going to come out. Now I'm going to pick up 2 of my 11 Rocaille beads and I'm going to slide those down to the end of my thread. Now at this point I'm going to push back those beads as snug as possible with my needle and then go down. And then I'm going to come back up behind those 2 beads. Let's see if I can get this in focus. There we go. And come up as close as I can behind the 2 beads that I just added and go back through those 2 beads. I just like to do it this way. I know that you can do couch stitch also, where you add all the beads and then you anchor them down individually, but I like to pick up 2 and then work my way around. So I'm going to pick up 2 again on my needle, pull those down, and push them back with my needle so that they're snug, and then I'm going to go down right in front of those 2 beads we just added. And then I just go 2 beads back right before those 2 beads that we just added, but I have seen where some people go 3 beads back to just make it more secure, but I think that it's secure enough because I like to go through all of them when I'm done. So, and I just went right back through those 2 beads I just added and pulled it tight. So as you can see, they all just start snugging up right up against each other. So I would pick up 2 more beads, bring those down to the end of my thread, and I kind of hold the thread taut with my thumb, and then I push the beads back up against the other beads that I've previously added with my needle. So let's see if I can do it this time. There we go. And then I stitch down relatively close to our focal bead. And then I'm going to come up behind those last 2 beads that I just added and go through those 2. And you can round the edges of your stabilizer if your thread keeps on getting caught on them. I'm not sure how big I want this bead embroidery piece to get yet, so I'm not going to do that. But at this point I'm coming out. Your thread, when you're done stitching down your beads, should always be coming out of the 2 beads you already added. So now I'm going to continue doing that all the way around. And once you get all the way around, you're going to join the 2, which let's see if we can go even all the way around. or you could just pick up one bead if that's the difference of the space. Let's see what we'll have to do this time. It looks like I may be able to fit the 2 more, but if you didn't have enough space between, let's see if I can get it in focus. If you didn't have enough space between the beginning of your small beads and where you are coming out with your thread, you can just pick up one bead to fill that gap and just go down and do the same thing that you did when you're picking up 2 beads. But it looks like I have room for 2 beads. And then I'm going to pick up 2 more beads. You want to stick with even count of your beads when you're trying to do the peyote encasement. So I put on my 2 beads, and then you're going to come up just like before, right before those 2 beads, and then go through those 2 beads. And this time you can start going around the entire cabochon. You can go around and thread through all of the 11 beads that you have around your cabochon just to tighten it all up. So I'll quick do that. And it's not really crucial to have an even amount of beads if you're not doing the peyote, but since I am doing the peyote encasement, I want to stick with the even amount. So I'm making my way around the cabochon, and now I'm going to pull it tight because I went around the entire thing just to tighten up the whole thing. So now we have our beads going completely around our cabochon. So now we can start building up the peyote encasement. So here I'm going to start doing the peyote. So I'm coming out of a bead, it really doesn't matter which one, and I'm going to pick up another bead, just one this time. And I'm coming out of this bead here, so I'm going to skip a bead and go through the next one. So you add one bead, and then on the side you're going to skip a bead and add one, and then we're going to pull that and get it to pop up, and it's going to start encasing the stone of your choice. So now I'm going to pick up another bead, skip a bead, so I'm coming out of this bead, so I'm going to skip a bead and go through the next one. And you can just do this all the way around. And because of this every other sort of pattern, that's why it's crucial to do an even count of beads around. So I'm coming out of this bead, so I'm going to skip a bead and go through the next one. And of course you can do this with multiple colors of beads, whatever you want. That's what's so fun about bead embroidery. So I'm going to pick up another bead. I'm coming out of this bead, skipping this next bead and going through the next one. I'm pulling it tight as I go along, but we can pull it tight at the end of the row also. So I'm going to pick up another bead and go all the way around doing this. Picking up a bead, I'm coming out of this bead, so I'm going to skip this next one and go through the next one after that. Okay, and now I'll continue doing this all the way around. When you get to the end of the row, you're going to do a step up where you go through your one bead. So for this one, let's see if I can show it to you. I was coming out of this bead, and then I added a bead, came out of this bead, and now I'm going to go up through one of the beads I added on this last row. So one of the beads that is sticking up, the next one in line. It's not the one that I just made stick up, but the one that I made stick up in the very beginning of this row. and I'll pull on that, and now we can start filling in those little spaces in between those beads. So now you see it almost looks like a flower. Let's see if I can get that to focus. And it looks kind of like a flower with all those little beads sticking up. So you could leave it like that and that's super cute too, but I'm going to fill in those gaps with beads. So I'm going to just pick up one bead, the same color, but you can do different, and go through the next bead that's sticking up. And then I'm going to pick up another bead and go through the next gap between the two beads. So go through the next bead that's standing up. And slowly you're just creating this sort of wall. So I'm going to do that all the way around. So you can see I was continuing doing that all the way around, but if you look at it this way, you can see those beads that stick out that we created on the last row. So I'm coming out of one of those beads, and now I picked up a bead and I'm going through the next bead that sticks out. And I pull that, and then I'm going to pick up another bead and go through that bead that sticks out and pull that in there so it pops in. And you don't have to pull this super tight at this point, you can do that at the end. And then I pick up another bead, go through that bead that sticks out, and then I'm going to pick up one last one for this row, and we're going to go through that original bead that had been sticking out, and then we're going to step up through the last through the bead that we had added in between the two that had stuck out. So we're coming out of this bead, and we're going to go through this next bead and step up to be able to start our next row. And now at this point, this is when you would want to tug it tight so that we can get it all tight. And now it all sort of pops in. And you can see that there's some gaps, and I think that that's because our beads, Rocaille beads, are thinner, so there's a few little gaps where you can kind of see the thread, but hopefully we'll be able to fix that. I'm going to do one more or two more rounds of this same sort of technique, just because I don't want us to be able to see the hole in our focal bead. The original row of regular seed beads around the bottom, then I built up one more row, then another, and then actually it looks like I did another, so 3 rows of peyote. And then I went around the entire top and I kind of cinched it up, went around it, and then I pulled it taut. So now at this point you're just going to want to work your needle down towards the base of the stabilizer by weaving through some beads. So looks like my thread got a little tangled, so let me untwist it. So now I would just go down the side of the beads and just work down towards the stabilizer. And it really doesn't matter what bead you come out of. So I'm just going to work down. I got now down to the bottom base row, and now I'm just going to stick into the stabilizer so that I'm coming out the back. So at that point I have no thread visible on the top, and now I'm just going to come back up through the stabilizer close to that row, and then at that point we're going to start with our next row of beads. So now I'm going to pick up some of these cubic beads, and these beads are cubic, but I got them from the Beads and Buttons show, as I previously said, so I don't really know the name. But basically, if you didn't have these cubic beads, you would want to go with an 8/0, I think, is what you would want to use in reference to the size. So I'm going to pick up one of my Rocaille beads, the yellow, and then that one cubic green. And then maybe I'll actually pick up 3 this time. We'll do it that way. So I'll pick up we'll call it 8/0 green, then the 11/0 yellow, and then the 8/0 green. And we'll slide that down our needle, and we will push it back with our needle and those beads back that we just added, and go down through the stabilizer. Then at this point we're going to come up right in front of those beads that we just added, and then go back through all 3 of the beads. And I'm going to do this the whole way around. So now though, I'm going to pick up a yellow, a green, and a yellow, because I want it to be every other of the yellow and the green. And then I push those beads back snug with my needle, go down through the stabilizer, and come up right before the beads that I just added. And go back through all 3 of those beads I just added. And now at this point I'm going to pick up the green, the yellow, and the green, and I'm going to slip those down, and then I'm going to kind of push them back with my needle and go down through the stabilizer, and then I'm going to come right back up right behind those 3 beads I just added and go back through the 3 beads I just added. And then I'm going to pull that tight, which it doesn't look like I got that one tight enough, so I'm just going to take those beads out quick, because I don't think I pushed the beads back enough with my needle, so they were a little loose looking, and I want them to lay snug, so we're going to just pull that out. So you can obviously see that it's really up to you what type of pattern you want to create with your beads, and what colors, what focal bead. You don't even need to have a focal bead, and you can just basically seed bead. It's really just, there's so many options. So I'm going to push those beads back with my needle, stick down through my stabilizer, and then come up right in front of those beads that I just added, and go through all 3 of them again. And I'm just going to do that around this whole row, that every other pattern. And if you do decide to do a bead embroidery project, I would love to see that picture, and you could just put a picture of it in the comment section below. So I added the beads, went down through the stabilizer, came up right behind those beads that I just added, and went through all 3 of them again. And let's hope that this pattern just works out perfectly around this focal bead I'm doing. And now at this point, if you start running out of thread, what's great is you just want to tie a knot at the end of your thread on the back of your project, weave that tail in to the back of some of your stitches that you've created, snip that off, and then do the whole just tying the knot just like you're starting all over again with your thread, and then just start up again. It's really easy, and you don't have to worry about, oh, I have so many knots in the back. It really doesn't matter, because you're going to be gluing something to the back of this anyway, because it's just to clean it up anyway, to make it look nice in the back. You're going to be gluing something, so it really doesn't matter if you have a lot of stitches and a lot of knots. So let's see if this works perfectly. So I'm going to pick up a green bead, pick up a yellow bead, pick up a green bead. It looks like we don't have room for one more green bead. Let's get rid of that. Looks like this will work perfectly, but I'm just going to pick up 1 green bead and 1 yellow bead and go right snug up against the bead that started out my row, and go down, and then I'm going to come up right in front of those 2 beads I just added and go back through all 2 beads. And at this point I would go through all the beads in this row and just tighten it up. That way it gets it looking so consistent and tight when you do that. So I'm just going to go all the way around. And it's getting a little difficult because I'm running out of thread, but I will tie on a new piece after I get around this. So I'm just going through all my beads along the entire outside that I just added and just threading through them, and then I'll pull them all tight. So I think we're about back to the beginning. So I'll just take that and tug it, and then I'll stitch down through the stabilizer, and then at that point I'll tie my thread into a knot, and then I'll just tuck in that thread on the back of the stabilizer, and then I'll start up with a new piece. Okay, so I decided to do yellow around this one, so I'm picking up 2 beads and then going around the entire thing, and doing that by picking up the 2 beads, snugging it up to the past 2 that I added, going down through the stabilizer, coming up behind those 2 beads that we just added, and going through those 2. And I'm doing that all the way around. So I'm doing that same, pick up 2, go down through the stabilizer, go back through the 2, and I'll do that all the way around. Okay, so I finished doing the yellow row along the bottom, and then this bit that I did here where they swoop up, I think looks really fun. So what you would do is you would count however many over you want to do in between, however many beads. You're kind of working off of the yellow row to determine the spacing. So you can count and determine how many beads you want in between, or you can do it every single bead and have it really concentrated of the swirls. But I like the kind of open look, and you can see the details that we had on the previous row. So basically I would come through a yellow bead, and then I would want to work all in one direction. And that way all your swirls are slanting in the same direction. So I would come out of a bead, a yellow one at the base, and then I would thread on these 3 beads, or however many would make it so you could reach the top. Then I would go through the peyote orange bead, so the bead that when you peyote, this top section automatically pops up more than the other ones. So you would go through your yellow one, thread on the beads, and then go through that orange one that sticks up more than all the other ones. And then you would work your way just back down and go through the stabilizer and come back up next to your next yellow bead that you want to add it onto, because you don't want to just, you always want to be coming from the base of your stabilizer through your yellow bead and then adding beads. That way they'll all slant in the same direction. Okay, so I completed going around this entire thing with this color, and of course you could leave it like this, but I'm going to peyote up this same orangey, really pretty AB color on top of this reddish orange row, and I think that that will look really pretty. So again, you're going to want to make sure that you have an even count of beads going around on that row that we just did. So I'm coming out of a bead, so I'll pick up my bead and then skip a bead and go to the next one. So basically that's how easy this will be, is we're coming out of this bead right here, so I'll pick up a bead, and I'll try to keep this quite consistent. I'll pick up a bead, skip a bead, and go through the next bead after that. And then I'll pull it tight so that they kind of pop up. And you can kind of see them there, they pop up, and it really just fills out the look. I think it looks so cute. And it kind of softens this harsh reddish orange color. So I'm going to pick up a bead, skip a bead, and go through the next one. And this can be kind of difficult because if you tightened up that last that reddish orange row, it can get kind of tight, but it's good to work with tight so that you don't see all that thread. So then pop that bead up, and I'm just going to keep on adding the bead, skip a bead, and go through the next bead. And then after this, I think I'm going to be done with this one, and then I'm just going to trim out around it, and then we can cover up the edge by doing more beading on the edge. So that's why I know I want to incorporate this green and turquoisey color, but I know I can do that on the edge. So I'll be ending this before I use those beads. And then on the very edge, I'll be tying in that color from the center bead. So I'm just going to keep on going all the way around, picking up a bead, skipping a bead, and going through the next bead. So I'm exiting that bead right there, so I'm skipping it and then going through the next one. And I'll just do this all the way around. I would probably just go around the whole red row and go through that all the way around again, just to sort of tighten it all up. And you can take a few beads at a time and just not going up to include those beads we just added, but just going around that base red row that we built off of. And that really just tightens it all up. And I've probably added on thread about 3 times now, but again, it's just so nice and easy that you can do it and you don't have to deal with that super long thread always getting tangled up on everything. You can just add it as you go. And I didn't find that I needed to add any thread wax to my thread when I'm using this beading thread, but if you're using sewing thread instead, you probably would want to do that before you start. Okay, so I think I've gotten all the way around now, and it's definitely tighter. So at this point, this is what my cabochon looks like. So now I would bring my thread to the back of my work, and now you can't see it so good because this is white stabilizer and white thread, but I would tie a knot with my thread, and then we can just weave this tail in under some of these stitches. Being careful not to trim any of those stitches that you love so much and you took so much time. You're going to trim your stabilizer. I'm going to roughly trim around this first, so it's just kind of like that. Now at this point, and you know, I made this harder for a demonstration because I did these little things because it'll be harder to see, but you're going to go around it, closely cutting it near the edge of your beads. I constantly flip mine back and forth to make sure that I don't cut through any of those stitches, and then I'll flip it again, cut a little bit more, flip it again, make sure constantly that I'm not trimming through any of those stitches. You can save some of the larger pieces of stabilizer for smaller bead embroidery projects, but obviously you're going to want to clean that all up. And then at this point you're going to want to choose your background fabric. So your background fabric, I know the common background fabric you might say is felt. I don't love felt. It's kind of fuzzy and I don't know, I feel like it sheds almost, so I don't like using felt so much. So I just use that same stabilizer on the back of it. So I would take a large piece of stabilizer and I would get some E6000, put some E6000 on the back, and I would glue that right back down to this same Pellon interfacing that I used to bead embroider on. And then you're going to let that dry for, 12 hours is probably the best. Let it fully dry as the package says. I used E6000. I applied that to the back of my piece that I had already made, and then I put this backing onto it and I held it and pressed firmly for a few minutes. Now it's been a few days later, so it's completely dry and the original interfacing layer is, and I would just trim right up to that. So that's what I'll quickly do. Okay, so in the upcoming part, I'm going to be showing you how to do the edging, but in that part, I'm going to just be picking up one bead with I already have a knot on here, but picking up one bead, going from the back of the stabilizer to the front of the stabilizer. Then when my bead goes there, I'm going to go up through that bead, and then it will be snugged up the way we want it to. Now the problem with this technique is you'll be able to see that thread on the edge of your bead the whole time, even in your finished project. So what I recommend doing is actually, I'll pretend I'm starting over again. I would recommend picking up two beads, coming right next to where you just were exiting, where your thread was just exiting, and then coming up through that second bead. This way you won't see that thread on the side of your bead. You'll just see two beads nestled very nicely instead of that thread showing on the side of your bead. And then just continue. At this point, all you need to do is pick up one bead and continue going all the way around. It's just when you first start that you want to make sure that you pick up two beads instead of that one. Okay, so I've finished trimming around the entire outer edge, making sure that it all looks even. I can see that there's a little bit standing up right here, so I would trim that off like so, and now we're good. So I'm going to be using two different colors for my edging, and that is going to be the Toho Round 11-0 Opaque Sour Apple. These are Toho beads. Obviously you don't need Toho beads for an edging of this piece. Embroidery pieces can really use any type of bead. So this is then also the Toho Bead Round 15-0 Light Jonquil Lined Aqua. So I'm using a 15-0 and an 11-0 for my edging. But of course you wouldn't need to, and I'll show you where you can stop with your edging if you didn't want to do all of what I'm going to do for my edging. So I'm just going to tie a knot in the end of my beading thread. I'm going to tie 2 knots just so it's a relatively good size knot. And I have this threaded onto my bead embroidery needle. So that this knot doesn't show up on the back of your piece, I'm going to, there's 2 layers. You can see that there's 2 layers, there's a separation here. And I'm going to come up between those 2 layers. That way our knot will go to the inside. So let me just quick do that. So I'm going through one of those layers, but not through the back fabric or whatever you choose to be your background fabric. Okay, so now my knot just snugged up really nice in between those 2 layers. So at this point, you're going to be coming out of your front stabilizer piece that you originally did your whole bead embroidery project on. So I'm going to pick up one of my 11-0s and bring that down and drop it down. At this point, your beads are going to be along the edge of your bead embroidery project with the holes facing out. It's not going to be sideways. Your beads aren't going to be like this. You're going to be seeing the hole of the bead along the outer edge. So you're going to, keeping that in mind, which I can snip this tail just a little bit away from the knot so that it hides. So let me show that. That's the knot, and then just a teensy bit of thread, and that way it will completely be hidden. You don't need that little, you don't need to keep a long tail on this. You don't need to weave it in or anything. So I'm going to hold the thread up, and then at this point I'm going to go from the back. This time we're going through the back stabilizer also, and go through the front stabilizer. So you're going through both the front and the back stabilizer, and you don't want to go too far in when you're trying to go through. You want to be relatively close to the edge, and you're going to go through that from the back to the front, going through both layers, and then you're going to see your little bead. And at this point, you're going to go up through that bead, and that way it's going to stand up like with the hole of the bead facing up. So that's what it should look like. Now you're going to pick up another bead, and you're going to go from the back to the front and put this through relatively close to the previous bead that you just added. And you're going to pull your needle through both the front and back stabilizer, and that bead's going to go like that. You're going to go up through that bead that you just added, and this way when you pull your thread, it will snug up beside the other one that you've added. Now you will see the thread going between the two beads. That's why you'll want to use matching fabric, thread, matching the beads, or you will be seeing that thread. So now I'm coming close to that other bead that I just added, coming close to that bead and going through both the front and back stabilizer pieces. And then I'm going to go up through the bead I just added. And you're going to want to do this all the way around, pulling tight, and then you'll see that you slowly will be getting your beads around the entire edge. So pick up your bead. I'm using my 11-0. You can use whatever type bead you want to for this. And then you're going to come relatively close to the previous beads that you had been adding. This looks like it may be a little bit too far away, but you can see relatively close, and then you're going to go through both front and back stabilizer, and then go up through the bead you just added, and then it will just snug down. And we're going to do this all the way around. Pick up a bead, go through the front and back stabilizer. I'll show you from the back what that looks like. You're going to go through the front and back stabilizer. I'll move this bead so you can kind of see how far down I'm going. Not too far down, but you're going down a little bit. Go through the front and back, and then go up through that bead that you just added. And I'm going to pull that tight. I'm going to do that all the way around, picking up an 11-0, going through the front and back stabilizer, and going up through that bead that I just added. And now I'll go all the way around doing this. Okay, so I've gone all the way around and I'm coming out of a bead right next to the first bead that we started with. So what you're going to want to do as your thread is exiting the top of that bead is you're going to want to go through the first bead that you added. And I'm going to pull that through, and that will kind of snug those two beads close to each other when you tug on your thread. And then I would go back up through the bead that I previously had been exiting and just pull it a little bit, and those two beads just pop very close together. I'm now coming out of the bead I originally had been, but it really just snugs them close up. So I had previously mentioned that you're going to want to use a thread that matches your bead. Basically, you probably would only have black or white thread in beading thread, and basically if you had dark colored beads you'd want to use black probably. If you had light colored beads you'd want to use white. You also want to keep in mind the background fabric that you're going to use, and you want that to kind of match your thread, because then your thread just disappears and it gives you a really finished look. But basically just use your own judgment on how you think that will work and which way you would like it. So I really like this green around the outer edge, and I'm going to do a picot edge today, so you would really like to have even number of beads around the entire outside, which I think I was able to achieve, but there are certain ways to work around that if you don't have an even amount, but I'm very happy that I do have an even amount to work with today. So I want my little 15-ohs to be poking out as the little pokes for the picot edge, so I'm going to be coming out of my bead and I'm going to add a green bead. This is my 11-oh, my little blue bead, my 15-oh, and another green bead, my 11-oh. And I'm going to go right back down through the next bead in the row. Oops. So I just dropped them off, but I'll quick show you where I'm going to go through. So you're coming out of this bead right here, your thread's exiting that bead. It really doesn't matter whether you want to go counterclockwise or clockwise, it really doesn't matter, but you're going to go down through the bead right beside it with your to create your picot edge. Pick those up, and now I'm going to go down through the bead right beside the bead my thread had been coming out of. And when you pull this tight, it creates your super cute little picot edge. Let's see if my camera can focus on that. But it will create your super cute little picot edge. So I'm going to do this all the way around, and what's great about these beads that you created along the border is it will give you perfectly placed picot edges. So now I'm going to come up through the bead right beside my picot edge, the previous one that I've done. I'm going to come up through the next bead, and then I'm going to pick up an 11-oh, a 15-oh, and an 11-oh, and I'm going to go down through the bead right beside the bead I was just coming out of. And when you pull this, hopefully it won't knot up on you. Let's see. When you pull it, you will have another little picot. And I think that this is just super cute. It really is just such a fun way to have those pops of color along the edge, and then that color is what ties in with my focal bead in the middle. So you could also do that concept. So now I'm going to come up through the bead right beside it, and then I'm going to pick up the 11-oh, 15-oh, 11-oh, and that 11-oh is a little bit bigger than my other one, so I'll change it up. And this is what you don't even need to have the 11-oh and 15-oh. That isn't crucial. Oops, bringing in some stabilizer with my thread, but it really doesn't matter. You don't need that size difference. I've done this same picot edge with 10-oh beads and just using 10-oh beads, not like two different sizes, and that works. So at this point, I just went down and finished the picot, so now I'm going to go up through the bead beside it. And I'm catching on everything on my board here. And now I'm going to just add the 3 beads basically, and then go back down through the bead right beside the bead we had been coming out of. And don't catch the back fabric, which is kind of what's happening for me. Here we go. Just go down through that bead, and there you go. You just keep on creating these super cute little picots all the way around. I worked my way all the way around, and at this point I was coming out of this bead. I added my 3 beads, and I went back down through the bead right beside it, and when you pull that in place, you now have a finished edge. So I did want to mention, if you have been having troubles with your thread tingling a lot and forming knots maybe a lot, you can of course use some thread wax. This is the Thread Heaven Thread Conditioner and Protectant is what they say on their package. And this is the only thread wax that I've ever used, but I'm sure there's other good ones out there. And if you wanted to use it, it looks like this on the inside, just a block. It's not too sticky, but it has a little stick to it, and then you could just hold your thread down with your thumb and just run your thread through that, and it will coat your thread for you. So that's a good option if your thread seems to be tangling a lot. So at this point, to finish off, I would probably just, since I'm exiting one of my 11 beads, I would probably just, let's see, I would probably just stick through the stabilizer right beside it. And then I'd be coming out of the front, and at this point I would probably go under some of my beadwork. Just aim my needle under some of the beadwork. This first row of like reddish colored beads that I have, I would aim it under that and then coming up, and then I would probably go over and go under it again, almost repeating what I just did, and going back around and coming back up under that, and then this time I would create a knot doing that. So when my thread creates this loop from going over, I would bring my needle through that and just see how that looks. Oops, it moved on me. There we go. Basically, you just want to see how it looks and then pull that knot tight, and then I would probably just you can weave through some beads again, like go through some of these red beads of mine. I would go through some of these and just basically just weaving. If I can get a hold of my needle, there we go. And you can use a pliers, a beading like flat nose plier, to help you pull your needle out of some beads if it got stuck. Like if my needle got stuck in those beads, I could get a plier and that could help me pull it through. But I would just weave through some of these beads again. Might make a whole pass around all these red beads for me. And then I would just, once I've gone all the way around, which let's go through a few more. Once you've gone all the way around, I would just stick it down through the stabilizer and exit the back in an area, and then just trim your thread super close to that. It's into a bookmark, loop, make a beaded loop for a bail. You could just put a jump ring through one of your Picot loops that naturally was formed on the edge, and you can use ribbon, yarn, anything you wanted to for a bookmark. You can make it into a pin by stitching or gluing a pin back on here. I mean, you can do so many things with this, and I really think that bead embroidery is really versatile, and you could really just do anything you wanted. Okay, I did want to quickly come on and just tell you that I did end up taking off the green and blue Picot edge, and I did it again in the light opaque orange in the check glass Rocaille beads. These are the 11-0s, so it's still 11-0s and 15s, but I decided to make it orange because I didn't like how much green there was around the edge in comparison to the whole piece. I hope that you decide to do a bead embroidery project, and you can definitely leave a picture of that in the comments section below, and I would love to see what you did. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.